Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Anne Stevens. Over to you, Anne.
Well, good morning. My name is Anne, and I'm Australian. I'm from tropical North Queensland. So this is Australia from the perspective of the first Australians. It's a country of around 250 language groups, more densely populated in the coastal areas. One of those areas where Indigenous population and culture is still dense is far north Queensland. Where I live, in Cooktown, a small town of around 3,000 people. You can see that it's halfway up the Cape York Peninsula. But I work in Cairns, 4-hour drive south, and I work at James Cook University campus, which is situated at the foot of the tropical rainforest ranges and just 10 minutes from the Coral Sea, home to the Great Barrier Reef. So today, I'm going to take this opportunity to lessen some people's fears about feminism and talk about the real value of understanding some of the ways in which feminist theory can influence, even reframe at times, our systems thinking. Throughout this presentation, I'll refer to both researchers as well as project managers of interventions, and is not limited to the field of community development. I've seen this used in business, education, and public policy planning. And I had several research goals when I started this work. To be able to detail a feminist systems framework, implementation and practice, but also to improve the academic discourse and relations across the schools of feminist thinking, contemporary feminist scholarship, and of course, systems thinking. So this is more of a life task, achieved through publication, and in talking to you like this today. And I don't think anything I say here today should shock, confront, or challenge. After all, the idea that feminism and systems thinking speak to each other was flagged by ISSS member Barbara Hanson, who couldn't join us today unfortunately as well, but over a decade ago, when she said systems thinking and feminism are compatible, even inseparable. So I will present 5 simple principles today. These emerge from my grounded theory analysis of 2 epistemological fields, critical systems thinking and cultural ecofeminism. And you'll also note through this presentation, because I'm feeling a little bit homesick, I've got lots of pictures from the environment around my place. I selected critical systems thinking because Gerald had recently given us his book, Systemic Intervention, which provided a sound theoretical exploration of the epistemology and its commitment to freedom and subjugation and ethical methodological stance appealed to my personal commitment to social justice. Critical systems thinking places emphasis on interventions to reduce benefits to communities, environments, and social justice outcomes. We must be conscious of the wider political consequences of systemic intervention and conduct an ideology critique to reveal hidden and unrevealed assumptions, because methods may make ideological assumptions, that is, assumptions with an identifiable political consequence. Yet failure to be aware of and account for hidden patriarchal attitudes or hegemonic practices may have far-reaching and unintended consequences. Adopting a feminist systems thinking perspective may help practitioners look for places where unintended consequences of an intervention might unfold. Selecting ecofeminism was a more difficult task. I had a thorough grounding in feminist theory in the early 90s at the University of Queensland, but it had been years since I'd engaged in feminism. I think this moment of my presentation is the time where I would like to make the distinction between feminist activism and feminist theorising. They are linked, for sure, but frequently misunderstood by reviewers. You might know a moment of bitter and twisted experience. I'll share with you some of the more interesting comments I've received. Oh, that's just a really small sample. Feminist thinking has been deliberately distorted throughout the decades to discredit and devalue. Yes, militancy, aggression, anger, and even separatism were strategies used by women, particularly at the time of the birth of the second wave in the 1970s. Well, through the practice of conscious raising, women articulated their experiences, and this led to the politicisation of the private sphere. Theorising was grounded in that women began to make sense of collective experiences and made unique and original contributions to sociology and political science. Differences and insights from other epistemological influences, particularly the Black civil rights movement, post-structuralism, and sexual political identities, established schools of feminist thought. Some argue that these fragmented the movement, ultimately undermining its unity and objectives. But demarcations are also useful to stimulate and sharpen debate. The demarcation has led to the dominance of one school of feminism above all others, in my opinion, and that is liberal feminism. This is the feminism that women are allowed to have, as it conforms to and is in the service of neoliberal hegemony. You may have heard the proposition that I supported women's liberation but it went too far. Liberal feminism keeps women in their place, with a few allowances. We can actually think in rational ways and contribute more to society than housewives and mothers. We can be elected to represent populations in the legislature. We may even be able to do the work of a man like flag lands. So while the dominant neoliberal hegemony has given us that, albeit with its glass ceilings, debates about reproductive rights and equal pay, and will we see America's first female president, other feminisms have been left out in the cold. So returning to my thesis question, I was looking for a feminism that accounted adequately for the oppression of gender, but also provides an epistemological treatment of the causes for and ways to transcend environmental oppression. I settled with cultural-ecofeminism, as it avoids essentialising and objectifying women and men into inescapable, biologically determined social behaviours, i.e. women are more nurturing because they can be mothers. Men are strong, rational, and love war. And a crucial point here is that any attempt to link women with nature is culturally imposed by a socially constructed patriarchal order. So cultural ecofeminism observes and exposes instances where the dominant masculine hegemony is able to exploit and marginalise others, including nature, which cultural ecofeminists will argue will continue to prevail while women and nature are subordinated to man and culture. And as we can see, this paradigm oppresses men too. So as my title implies, I'm going to jump straight into each of these principles now and dip back into the theory as and when it is required. Just before I start with the first one, please note what feminist thinking is not. It is deliberately non-prescriptive. These principles are in no particular order and don't have to be used as a set. They're also being used at the outset of projects in terms of planning, during projects as a reflexive tool, and also in post-project evaluation. So what they do achieve is deeper levels of engagement with social groups and communities, deeper consideration of local environments, and consequently improved outcomes, financial, social, environmental, and cultural. So what are they and how do they work? As they are a theoretical product of schools of feminism, it stands to reason that gender will feature in the principles. The principle sensitive to gender is the first to be described here today. This principle simply asks that we not assume that women's experiences are parallel or the same as a homogeneous male proxy. Sounds self-evident, that even in Western society, after all these years of feminist consciousness, surely we know this. Yet it is remarkable how commonly we are blind to women's particular interests, perhaps due to the neoliberal ideologies at work again. We're asked, what do you mean you have a particular need? You've been liberated. You have equal access to education, and we embrace your contribution to the workforce. Western women talking about Western women's rights kind of feels indulgent. The background to this, and several of the principles that I'll go on to discuss, is the centrality of the socially constructed dualism. The authors of critical systems thinking and cultural-ecofeminism, who draw from larger bodies of work outside these knowledge systems, provide a devastating critique of the subject-object dualism. For anyone unfamiliar with the dynamics of these constructs, a dualism is a constructed dichotomy that polarises difference. They are sets of contrasting but related phenomena with shared interconnected features. The contribution feminists make to this theorising around the man-woman or man-culture dichotomy, and cultural ecofeminists place nature as a central category of analysis and a concern with dualisms that include reason, body, mind, matter, and culture, nature. In each of these dualisms, the higher ordered subject is pitched against the lesser valued object along superior and inferior lines. Reason's prestige over experience or emotion has been, since the Renaissance, the ideal expression of human achievement, justifying man's dominion over woman and nature, and thus the mark of the modern rational man. These constructs hold major implications. In scientific method, its associate positivism argues for the elimination of human bias through objectification and separation of the researcher and researched. In the social sciences, its own particular forms were established. Emile Durkheim and the French positivists, for example. It has been held responsible for promoting reductionist, mechanistic, and atomistic worldviews, which are deeply internalised by the collective filters in individuals' linguistic knowledge about human endeavour and reinforced through our institutions and cultural modes of entertainment, technologies, and political, social, economic instruments of governance. The cause of chronic global maldevelopment, according to Marina Mears and Vandana Shiva, as it has distorted how we humans interact with and value other humans, communities, and the non-human, or even more than human, as Val Plumwood would express it. The more than human realm is the realm of companion and captive animals, organisms, biological communities, species, and ecosystems. And from a systems thinking perspective, valuable opportunities to view things that interrelated and networked have been missed. The objective of both cultural ecofeminism and critical systems thinking is to transcend dualistic thinking. They both offer creative ways to do this. In the end, both, I think, call for a reframing of dualisms that cause harm to people or nature by revaluing the lower order or inferior side. This opens our thinking to revaluing our relationships to the many others that are culturally relegated to a lower order, and leads us to the next principle, which is to value voices from the margins. This principle encourages us to hear and value the voices of the silenced and to be bringing these voices to the table. Systems thinkers must be mindful of diverse cultural and ethnic groups affected by but living beyond decisions and actions made in the North. The Chilean feminist Margarita Pisano has articulated the impact of Western patriarchy on the world's powerless people. She has said that whoever argues that the patriarchy has been humanising itself does not see the thousands of third world people terrorised by and trying to escape famine, drought and war without being able to jump over the invisible wall the first world has mounted to maintain its privileges. And it was pointed out to me recently that sadly that wall into the United States is not so invisible, and I would suggest that neither is that wall into Australia. Our treatment of refugees and denial of climate change is rendering us a pariah state. So I think it also places a moral onus on researchers and project managers to actively seek to engage with voices from the margins. In a recent conference of business delegates discussing the future of Far North Queensland last week, I heard much confusion in the room about consultation. There is a level of expectation from business and government sectors that citizens should come to us when asked for feedback. I've also seen some shocking examples of community engagement in the name of consultation. In 2009, an aged landowner, a neighbour of mine, and this is looking down on his property, was concerned about state government plans to compulsorily resume his land to make way for a dam. He refused all efforts of the government representatives to talk to him about it, and had made veiled threats such as, "You step foot on my land and I'll shoot." A time came when the government representatives did step foot on his land, entering his home kitchen with 2 security guards who ordered him to sit at the kitchen table with his hands where they could see them. In my view, this man was just terrified of losing all that he had. His wife had recently died and he was functionally illiterate. She had managed technical documents such as contracts. He was more comfortable mustering livestock than talking with humans. Was heavy-handed consultation like this really necessary? Researchers and project managers must be cognizant of their social power, commonly having more power than the people they study. Valuing voices from the margins encourages us to bring those voices to the table without the use of security guards. Engagement with the margins extends to the more than human realm. Reflective of the ecofeminist input into these principles, valuing non-human voices is achieved by finding a place for emotion, subjectivity, particularity, and our animality. That is our continuity we Homo sapiens share with animals, or do they share with us? Understanding the voices of non-human species lies in humans recognising non-human agency, and that ecosystems and species are present on the margins, cohabiting, occupying and living with and alongside us in unnoticed and taken for granted ways. We have the capacity to empathise and give the more than human realm greater moral consideration in the processes of our work. But I believe we need a profound ethical shift to recognise nature's agency in experiencing the impacts of our actions, including their trauma, suffering and loss. Loss includes the loss of social networks between species, networks of species, and the loss of access to the necessities that may be caused directly or indirectly by human activity. Remarkable evidence is emerging that plants use the specific role of communication to process information and share it with other plants and even species. I call this the chattering of plants. Work being done at the University of Western Australia in collaboration with ecologists led by Monica Galliano for the Centre of Evolutionary Biology are uncovering understandings about plants in the Australian landscapes that's been known to the Australian Aboriginal people for thousands of years. Clearly excited by her own findings, Monica is fascinated by the communicative mechanisms, language and memory function and ability to learn of plants. And I share her excitement. I hardly know where to begin to describe this work with you today. I'll give it a go. Through a series of creative lab-based experiments, the team have been able to demonstrate that plants emit and receive sets of signals to each other over distances. They detect vibrations in frequency sensitivity in ways that generates behavioural modifications. This gives plants the ability to evaluate information both above and below ground, often about their neighbours. They also share information about the resources available in their surroundings. They can warn others of insect attack, and using an extensive vocabulary, respond to cues of injured neighbours and when they are not yet attacked themselves. And they put into place preemptive defensive responses. Plants can sense and identify their own kin. They can problem solve in groups, and contrary to the neo-Darwinist ideologue, they facilitate kinship selection processes based on cooperation and altruism. Competition plays a fundamental role in shaping plant communities, but facilitating or positive interactions are also ubiquitous. But to put the research into Monica's own words, astonishingly, they put Mimosa pudica, known in our household as a sensitive weed, through its paces and observed that it can display a learned response even when left undisturbed in a favourable environment for over a month. That is, mimosa has the capacity to remember. Its response to stimulus is possible due to the presence of calcium signalling networks in the cells, similar to those underlying memory processes in animals. And they conclude that the process of remembering may not require the conventional neural networks and pathways of animals. Brains and neurons are just one possibly undeniably sophisticated solution, but they may not be necessary requirement for learning. There's a lot of words devoted in their publication articles explaining the biological functions behind these abilities, which you may like to investigate yourself. Where I think this work is informative is in the many questions it raises about the nature of nature's agency. Understanding the complexity of ecological systems as communicative, learning, adaptive beings, does this alter the value of nature? Is it okay to think about nature's value in dollar and trade-off terms? Or does this elevate nature's standard privy to its sophistication and history? If these are communities that communicate with vocabulary, problem-solving, and support their young towards higher levels of fitness, are they really just sentient? Could whole ecological systems and places be relegated as non-human persons, the status given to dolphins and whales in India? I think this evokes another FST principle, and that is to centre nature in all that we do. Increasingly, in the Western political and governance models, we defer decision-making to teams of experts to manage and administer technical situations or technical solutions. This principle doesn't argue against the skills of expert professionals, but we must be mindful of the ideologies of work anytime we express the attitude that environmental considerations would be better understood and administered by management experts with technical solutions. I believe it also relies on a healthy conception of difference and distinguishability. I understand the resort of environmental activists to take to the hills, to live off the grid, with nature, a part of nature, and in doing so, drawing on a holistic view of themselves as being one with nature. It may also be a spiritual quest, and this view can be seen in the Gaia theory, for example, and was the basis for the hugely popular science fiction film Avatar, where a complete oneness with nature was depicted as the highest expression of civilization. But an extinguishment of the boundaries between human and nature is problematic. If the boundaries between humans and nature are indistinguishable, movement beyond the Cartesian man-nature dualism cannot be achieved. Because part of the reason for this is that when otherness and difference is incorporated or merged with a self through an egotistic self-sacrifice, difference of the other may be denied, eroding both the independence and distinctiveness of the other from oneself. Val Plumwood wrote that, if I see myself as indistinct from you, or you as not having or being your own being that is not merged with mine, then I cannot preserve a real sense of your well-being as opposed to mine. So I think that by now you will be noticing that these principles carry with them a commitment to both moral and ethical practice. Cultural-Ecofeminism presents epistemology from an ecofeminist standpoint and is clearly ethically and morally implicated. Arguably, it is inseparable from those who think and practice it. And it has an active political and participatory emphasis to acknowledge and understand current and create new forms of thinking and doing. The question of what to research and how to observe are moral questions. And obviously, particular care is needed. This therefore leads me to the fourth principle. And this is really one for the project managers, as I see them struggling with this as a concept. That is, to select an appropriate methodology in the first instance and engage participatory process in order to select methodology. Because, as we should be all well aware, one's methodological framework is fundamental to research practice. We must be thoughtful in giving one particular theory or philosophy primacy over others. And we should, I think, in this age of consensus seeking, allow for opportunities to surface multiple, disparate, even antagonistic viewpoints. Contentions can generate new knowledge and difference and offer powerful learning opportunities. This is a commitment to distributing power and relinquishing control. And this might entail taking some risks, feeling a bit of discomfort, and accounting for the uncertainty. And reflection is a crucial tool which leads us to the final principle. Promote plurally desirable and sustainable social change. Frankly, if we're not in it to bring about desirable and lasting social change, what are we doing? Building a new framework for knowledge generation needs a conversation about boundaries. By way of example, consider the conventional and alternative ways of thinking about sustainable development. I draw on the slides here a topical example of the Great Barrier Reef, which I'm not actually going to go into here, but colleagues at James Cook University have been engaged in consultative processes around systemic governance of this very complex set of systems, and this work is ongoing. You'll be aware of the many definitional limitations of sustainable development. It's been narrowed to refer to the carrying capacity of natural resources to support human activity. An alternative way of considering sustainability is in localised agreements made between stakeholders engaged with a particular problem. That recognises that sustainability is an emergent property of the social system. That is, it is the outcome of their collective decision-making, relies less on externally applied solutions from outside experts or inputs. And when actions are resolved by the stakeholders themselves, answers may be better grounded within the context of unique sets of issues or concerns. Within a systemic analysis, stakeholders and ecological subjectivities can be formed, contested, destabilised and reformed in a democratic process. So that's an introduction to the principles. Do they work? Well, yes. In the work that I've done to learn more about them in practice, I've seen them help people think about their projects in new ways. They've been used in different contexts and projects now around the world. Ellen, our Vice President of Conference, has been applying them in South America, developing them into a feminist systemic intervention methodology. I have another PhD student who is interested in applying them in Sri Lanka. And I've continued to use them in and around the diverse communities of Northern Australia. I've designed surveys and questionnaires for program participants, using the principles like categories in which to frame the questions. I've also used the principles to ask open-ended discussion questions, use them as prompts for project managers and workers in the social services sectors. Sometimes these principles have been worded very clearly and explicitly. Often I've had to reduce the emphasis on the feminist concept. But being able to do this gently encourages people to think about gender and environment where they might not have been in focus, and trying to minimise the risk that people will take on alien agendas and therefore further marginalise people. The principles have given insights into the effectiveness of programs, the potential areas for change or growth that have otherwise not been seen. But whilst the principles are integrated, the presence of one principle does not ensure another. And lastly, they've been used in a variety of research projects using different methodological approaches and methods to collect and analyse data. Lawyer Polly Higgins is driving for international law reforms so that in the foreseeable future, large-scale destruction of parts or whole ecosystems may become a crime against humanity. The question then arises, what will we do and how will we do it when the old ways are illegal? These principles provide a strong focus for reflexive practice and for thinking about social and environmental justice ethics. It's my hope that these simple principles can assist practitioners to make the transitions towards their new research and management paradigms. Thank you.